Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel today. We're going to be setting up a powerful media server. This will also form part of episode 3 of my new series, Building the Ultimate Home Lab. So if you haven't checked out episodes 1 and 2, feel free to do so. Episode 1 was just building the hardware. Episode 2 was installing things like a reverse proxy, fail to ban, Nextcloud, things like that. But here in episode 3, we're up in the ante. Now, you don't have to watch any of the previous episodes because each episode is its own contained thing. And today we are building the ultimate download station. And essentially, it's all going to be confined into one giant compose file. You can feel free to separate these out later if you wish, but I'd recommend keeping them all together because we're also going to partner this up with Glutetun, the VPN management container. And having all these in the same stack just makes things a little bit better for connectivity, especially if you ever need to restart Glutetun for any reason. We're going to be installing Jellyfin, which is a powerful media server in its own right, which helps you stream your movies, TV shows, and music to any device. We're going to be installing the Arrs apps, a suite of apps that make it easier to download and organize your media content. We're going to be installing Jellyseer, which is a really cool tool to search for cool new TV shows and movies, all completely legal and copyright free, by the way, and download them into your downloaders. We're going to be adding Deluge and Sabnzbd into the mix. So, without further wait, let's jump into it and I'll show you how to get this up and running. Now, this is the compose file that we're going to be using. It's pretty long, it's got over 200 lines, but do not be put off by that. It's a very simple configuration. Now, I'm going to start off by installing this onto CASA OS, and essentially it's the same process as doing this on Linux, because instead of going the normal app route, we're going to be doing this as a customized app. And for those on Linux, this is just the same as creating a Docker compose file. But let me familiarize you with the compose file itself. The first thing we've got on here is the Glutetun container under services. And you're thinking, Jesus, Keith, why have you got so many ports in here? Well, if you take a closer look to the right-hand side of each of these ports, you'll notice that they're the ports for every application that we're going to deploy. And the reason for that is that Glutetun will become the container that serves us access and connectivity to these ports. So if you've got any ports down below, say for example in Jellyfin, we comment them out with a hashtag. Obviously we'll copy and paste these first, and then we'll paste them above. Now I've already done this for you all, and all of these ports have apps in this compose file, so you don't have to worry about copying and pasting anything. Of course, if you already have existing containers, you either want to back them up and delete them, or modify this compose to remove the parts of the files that you already have. Just remember, if you want those containers to be served through the VPN in Glutetun, you will need to put the ports in here, and then comment them out in their respective containers. So you'll notice that going down the list under volumes, because I'm starting this off with CASA OS, CASA OS's data file structure always starts with data in capitals and then app data with a capital letter at the beginning of each. CMC is my little custom input into that, which just stands for CASA Media Center. And the reason I've done that is because otherwise your file browser would be completely overrun by folders. And I don't want to do that to you, and I didn't like it myself. So everything in the CASA OS file browser will be in the CMC folder after we've done this. And then obviously Glutetun is the application that we're having in there. And on the past the right hand side of the colon is inside the containers file structure. You can obviously modify the left hand side for whatever you want, but just bear in mind as we go down the list, especially in the Arrs apps and our downloaders like Deluge and Sabnzbd, you are going to want to try and maintain some consistency, because those apps look for each other's data structures to help them find the files they're about to move. In the Glutetun environment variables, we also want to choose our VPN. Now, when setting up Glutetun, obviously you're going to have your own providers, your own VPNs that you're going to want to put in here, and I'm going to put everything in the description below. All the links and commands to these things that you see in this video will be below. But going back and compose file there, setting up this section in Glutetun is very unique. I'm going to be using NordVPN, but you might be using something else. Well, all you've got to do is come here to the Gluetun wiki, hit providers, and then there's setup instructions for every single VPN provider you can think of. And then literally all you've got to do on here is click the one that you're associated with, and then it'll give you some instructions on what that section should look like. Now, for example, in NordVPN, the username and password is not the username and password of your NordVPN account, but rather the manual credentials, and you'll find those inside your NordVPN account. You'll have to go online, log in, click on NordVPN, and then go to find those credentials manually. You can then type in what country you want the VPN service to be found in. Again, very unique to NordVPN. If you've got a different provider, such as Mulvad, again, it shows you the different things that you can have there. I'll link this in the description for you below. The other thing you're going to notice down the compose is that I've set every single PUID and PGID, which is the user in the group associated with this Docker and user platform on the host system, so that file permissions are the same throughout all of the services in this compose file. Now, if yours are different, you just change it to whatever yours is. 9 times out of 10, this is the correct setup. And then as we keep going down here, we've got Jellyfin again. You can see the user and groups. The time zone I've set to mine, you change yours. You can actually uncomment this section if you'd like, and then change the IP address or web address to wherever your Jellyfin domain is pointing at. I am not using that at the moment. Volumes, again, we're following the CASA OS approach here because that's the first operating system I'm showing this on, which is data, app data, and then everything follows from there. If you were on Windows, for example, you wouldn't be using // you'd be using /. That's a little bit of configuration for you to change and make sure that applies to the entire compose file. You'd also want to put drive letters in here, for example, C, and don't forget, change those slashes all over the place. The ports for Jellyfin, we've commented out down here because we've got them above in the Gluetun container. Very important if you want to start putting this through. Now, something else to point out here on Jellyfin, especially with these ports, it really depends. If you have a reverse proxy, I'm assuming you're using ports 80 and 443, and then they're pointing back here to 8920. If that's the case, you're fine, because you're not going to put port 443 or 80 up in the Gluetun container, because obviously you've got your router port forwarding that straight to the reverse proxy, and then the reverse proxy you can just set to point at the IP address and port as normal. If you are port forwarding on your router 8920 or 8096, well, it should be 8920 because you should never expose anything without SSL at minimum, but highly recommended for VPNs no matter what. If you are port forwarding your router directly to your Jellyfin, then you will probably want to uncomment the port here, like so, and make sure that lines up with all the indentations above, what that does. And you'll also want to remove this ports from the Gluetun container above, otherwise you won't have connectivity reach your system. You'll also note that every single service below Gluetun has this network mode service Gluetun. And what that means is that it's going to send all traffic through the Gluetun container service, in effect forcing that VPN connection. Now, that you'll still be able to access these things locally, there's no problem with that, but it just means for any internet traffic getting out of the system, they'll then go through your VPN server. If you're reverse proxying, this won't matter to you as long as you've set it up in the way I've specified, just by leaving these as is, putting them in the Gluetun ports above, and then just setting your proxy like Nginx proxy manager to the IPN port as normal. You only need to change that if you're port forwarding the router directly to this port and on this computer. Deluge, again, user and groups the same, time zone, again, volume structure, data, app data, CMC, and then the following. Just remember, some of your downloaders may have incomplete and complete folders. And the other thing to specify is that on the right-hand side of the colon here in volumes, especially in the Arrs apps and especially in your downloaders, you're going to want to have a very uniform file structure. And what I mean by that is that, for example, you've got data incomplete downloads and data downloads. If we didn't have the data by here, and just had incomplete downloads and downloads, it would treat them as their own file systems, and they would be excessive I/O input outputs on your hard drives and SSDs, and transfer speeds for your movies and films would be really slow getting across the system. So by putting that data folder there, it means that it's Docker looks at these as their one complete file system, and therefore makes these transfers almost instantaneous. So just so you're aware of that. Again, with Deluge, the ports, we've chucked them all up above. Network mode service Gluetun. Sabnzbd, user and groups the same. Time zone, data structure. Again, you'll see data here for the downloads and incomplete. I've included a backup directory here in case you want to configure that as well. Again, we've commented out the ports, they're up above. Network mode service Gluetun. Prowlarr. Again, same situation. Data structure, same. Prowlarr's a bit unique compared to the other Arrs apps in that there's only going to be one data folder there for downloads, because it doesn't actually do any of the moving per se. Ports up above, network mode service Gluetun. Sonarr, bit different. So we've got the config file here, and as you can see, we've got data downloads, data backup. I do like to keep everything lowercase. Data TV series. Now I have added a second TV series folder here in case you have another drive on your system you might want to map this to. Maybe this is located in a different area, in which case if you have more than one of these drives you could literally uncomment this out, and then obviously you could change this to wherever that TV series is. Maybe it's in Mount SanDisk or wherever you've got a mounted device there. Again, at the end there you'd have TV series 1, just to differentiate the differences. Back in Jellyfin, we can marry these up into the same library, but obviously here they would be separated. Ports, again, commented out up above in the Gluetun container. Network mode service Gluetun. Again, radar, exactly the same. Notice you've got data downloads and data movies. Keeps everything fast. Ports uncommented. Ports commented, and then up above in Gluetun, network mode service Gluetun. LiDAR, exact same setup. Ports commented there with a hashtag up above in the Gluetun container. You've got your data downloads here, and you've got data music there. Reader for your books. Again, you've got data books, data downloads. Ports up above. You're only changing very little things in this compose file, if not none at all. And if you are using this on CASA OS, then this data structure will be the same for all of you. Network mode service Gluetun, Flare Solver. So, for example, if you go on torrent websites, things like that, which you can perfectly use to get legal files, don't ever believe you can't. There's a lot of Linux ISOs to download. Again, we've got time zone, user groups, ports commented out, they're up above, network mode service Gluetun. And then finally, Jellyseer, which is going to be our kind of request thing you can use to browse and see what's out there, what's the latest films and TV series out. Things like that for all your copyright-free content. Ports commented up above in the Gluetun container. And then we've got it down here, look, as in data, app data, CMC, Jellyseer. So everything falls under that, data, app data, CMC. This is unique to CASA OS. Again, you don't have to do this if you're running Linux or you're putting this on Windows. You're making those differences yourself. Reset and let's stop network mode, service Gluetun. So before we copy and paste this over, make sure you've got your Gluetun container set up, the environment variables, make sure this is all correct. Otherwise, everything else is going to actually fail. Now, if you don't want to use Gluetun for whatever reason, that's absolutely fine, and you just want this for the all-in-one, you can literally go from Gluetun up here, all the way down to Jellyfin, and just click delete. Simple as that. If you don't want Gluetun, that's how you get rid of it. But I'm going to set this up as if we were doing that. So when we've got all that there, you're going to copy all of this, or if you're copying this from the web site, because down below I'll leave a link for this. I'll put this on my GitHub for you all, so you can just copy and paste and then edit to your heart's content. Then we're going to head over to the terminal. Now, if you're in CASA OS, to access the terminal, you're going to go to the top left here and click Terminal, and then you're then going to log in with the details of the underlying operating system. So what do I mean by that? I mean the mini mainframe is my username, And then the password is the password I use for to log into my Ubuntu server, or in this case, the Ubuntu desktop. If you've got them the same as your CASA OS, that's absolutely fine, but just note sometimes they can be different. It's whatever your underlying operating system is, because CASA OS is not a true operating system. It's an overlay for Linux operating systems. It's an overlay for CASA operating systems. Once you've done that, you can just click connect, and that gets us into the terminal. Now, here in the CASA OS terminal, this is the equivalent of your Linux terminal. So if you're following along for Linux, you can certainly do so. You'll be in your terminal right now, whether that's on the desktop or your server, whatever you're doing. And if you're in CASA OS, you just follow along as such. What you're going to want to do is make sure you're in your home directory, which I'm in right now. That's the mini mainframe. And if I do ls to see the contents of the directory, you'll see that there is a compose.yaml file already present. So I'm going to leave this link in the description for this compose file. But if you're on Linux or CASA OS and you would rather just download this from the GitHub without doing any of the copy and pasting, all you've got to do is go to your terminal as I've shown you. Just right click this link in, which is curl-l, the link to my compose file, and then it outputs that as compose.yaml. And I'll leave this in the description below for you, so you can just copy and paste to make it extremely easy for you. And then just click enter. If we do ls, we will see the compose file is now there. Just don't forget to sudo nano compose.yaml to edit some things in here, like your VPN password and username and things like that. But just be very careful about the formatting, and that you don't alter it too much, apart from your paths or whatever you've got to change. Just be really careful about that formatting. Once you've entered your username and password, and you can literally just do Control-O, hit enter, and then Control-X to get back out. Now, to get the contents of the compose that I've just shown you, just go to the link in the description below, and you'll see a link there listed as compose file. Once you copy the contents of that compose file, you can come back here. All you're going to want to do is do sudo nano compose.yaml. Put your operating system password in, and then copy and paste the compose file into here like I already have. Now, to show you that's all working as is, I'm going to delete this file quickly and then just copy and paste it to show you. So I'm going to do sudo remove compose.yaml. As you can see, that's now disappeared. And then I'm going to put that command again in sudo compose.yaml. All copy. I'm going to paste that in. So that should be fine. The only thing you're going to want to change in here at this point is that username and password combo. Now, I'm going to obviously blank this out from you because this is personal to myself. Once that's put in and you're happy with all the directories and ports that are being used, you can literally just on the keyboard do Control and O and then hit enter. That will write the file to the directory, and then we can hit Control and X to come out of it. Now, at this point, all we've got to do is do sudo docker compose up -d. That -d or -d means that we can spin up this compose file without kind of being stuck inside the terminal area, because if we spun it up and then closed the terminal down, it would actually just stop everything. So putting that -d in is quite important. And as long as we're in the directory where we just created that compose file, this will work. As you can see, it's now pulling all those images down from the internet, and then it'll start to spin those up for us. And that's created those containers, and it's creating the network as well. Now, the other reason why we're keeping these containers and services together in the same compose file is due to a unique issue with Gluetun. Well, technically it's an issue with Docker. There are a few workarounds, but without having to go into all that with you today, essentially if you ever redeploy Gluetun and the containers you've connected to it are not in the same compose file, those containers will permanently lose access, and you will literally have to, a simple restart won't even fix that if it's a complete redeployment of Gluetun. You'll have to completely recreate the containers for them to reconnect to the Gluetun network stack. So without having to worry about all that, that's why everything's in the same compose file. Now, essentially, while I've been talking, all these services are spinning up, and you will have to give it a few minutes just for everything to get up and running, because sometimes in the background, containers are creating databases and pre-configuring lots of files and things like that. So it is important that we give it a few minutes to start. But one of the first things that we're going to want to do is test the Gluetun VPN and make sure that it's using my Node credentials correctly, and that it's making a connection with the Node server. To do that, we're going to hit the following command. And again, everything will be in the description below if you want to copy and paste. So we're going to do sudo docker exec IT for interactive Gluetun wget ipconfig.io. And what essentially this command does is it contacts the ipconfig.io website, attempts to identify its own IP address for the system, and then it'll download that information for us. Okay, so it turns out the reason why that didn't work was because in the YAML file, in the compose file, I actually had my username and password for the VPN is the same thing. I didn't actually specify the correct password. So it's good to note that. So let's try that again. So, or sudo docker compose down. That worked. And the reason you're going to need to do this, like I said earlier, is because you can't just simply restart the containers in all instances. It doesn't always work to reconnect back to Gluetun. So if we do a sudo docker compose up now, just make sure... Oh, and I didn't do the -d. And this is what happens when you don't do the -d. Well, at least I'm showing you how that works. Now if I do Control-C, and this is why if you cancel out of the terminal, it'll stop all this. Obviously, this was all done on purpose just to show you how it all works. -d, that gets everything started again. Give it a few seconds, hence the channel motto, for amateurs, by amateurs. Definitely living up to that name. Okay, now with that done, we're going to run that command that we did earlier on, which is sudo docker exec, that's execute, execute, -it for interactive. Gluetun is the container name, and we're going to use the command wget ipconfig.io. That's looking good to me. What that's done now is it's contacted ipconfig.io, found our IP address, and then put it into an index.html file. To read the IP address, all we've got to do is do cat index.html. Oh, of course, we've got to run it through the container. So just go up the command, press up on the keyboard, get back to this command, and then do cat index.html, because we're running the commands inside the container, not on the host. So that's why that's important. And there you will see an IP address of 192.160.247.227. Now that is different from my current IP address, because my current IP address is, and obviously I'll blur out most of it. If I do this on the system, if I do curl ipconfig.io, and you might be saying, Keith, why are you using curl ipconfig.io here, but you use wget at the top? Essentially, it's decided by the container creator. Obviously, containers are built to be small, lean, and mean, where they have the least amount of dependencies in them, the least amount of things. That's why Docker containers are so fast at running and so small. Well, they either install curl or they install wget, or sometimes other combinations, and that's why you'll see throughout the video sometimes I'll use wget on containers and curl on others. And if you're testing the IP address in some of your containers, then if you find curl doesn't work, just use the wget alternative like I have. The only benefit I think to curl really is that you don't have to mess around with those HTML files. It just pops out in front of you the IP address as you will see. So on the host system here, we're going to run curl ipconfig.io, and essentially that will get us the IP address for my system. which is there. Now, you can't see the whole thing, obviously, but as you can see, it's different to the IP address in the Gluetun container. Now, if I just do clear to get all this off the screen, and I click up on the keyboard until we get to our sudo docker exec it, now we can run another one. So we know we've got Sonarr running. We haven't configured anything, by the way, at this point. We haven't gone into Sonarr. We haven't gone into any of the Arrs apps. We haven't gone into Deluge or Zab, because you're going to need to go into all those services and start configuring them. And I do have a video on configuring all those. I'm not going to go into the actual configuration because this video is long enough as it is. But if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of how to configure all these services, I do have a video which I am going to link in the description below. This is literally to get the all-in-one setup done so that it's all in one compose file. But I have that video waiting for you whenever you're ready. While we're on the subject, though, to test that Sonarr and Radar and all the Arrs apps and things like that are all running in here, we're going to do sudo docker execute -it Sonarr. And if we do, we'll try the curl command, ipconfig.io. So curl does work. If curl ever doesn't work, then you just do what I did earlier on, wget ipconfig.io, and then do the cat index.html file. And sometimes that number will bump up higher in the file. So it might be index.html.1 or index.html.2 if you're doing the wget version, not curl. So there you go. It's sharing the same file as the same IP address as Gluetun. So if we do again, and you saw my IP address and it's not the same, obviously, so I do Radar. See, that'll have all the same IP address because that's going through NordVPN. What about Deluge? Deluge is running the same thing. Sabnzbd. As you can see, all of these are running the same IP address because it's all through Gluetun. If I just do Gluetun one more time. Oh yeah, we need to do wget for Gluetun. Oh, misspelling it. Glutetun. And you notice how it's bounced up there. Look, index.html.1. So if we do this again, and while we're in here, we do cat index.html.1. There you go. So they're all using that NordVPN IP address now through Gluetun. And at this point in time, you could literally, on your CASA OS, that's another cool thing to show you. Look, so in the CASA OS data structure, you've got app data, as I showed you. So data, app data, there's our CMC. And then there's all our files in there. So at this point, you could put all your movies in here, or your TV series in here, music in here, books in there. And then they would be found by the respective components and services. And remember, in the compose file, you can change the location of where your movies are. So maybe you already have a large movie collection. If that is the case, then you would change on the left-hand side of the colon here the path to where those are. If you've got a network share, you would put that in here on the left-hand side. And that is how you modify and maneuver those. And like I showed you earlier on about in the Gluetun part of the compose where all our ports actually are, and I've conveniently put next to them the names of everything. So if you did want to go in to configure those, for example, you wanted to start configuring your Prowlarr, well, Prowlarr is on port 9696. Even though everything's going through Gluetun, you can still access it locally. So you take the IP address of your machine. In my case, that's 192.168.624 colon, which are the two little dots. And then as you can see there on Prowlarr, it's 9696. You'd put 9696 in. Prowlarr will then bounce up ready for customization and configuration. And that goes the same with every one of these in the compose file. Your Zab, your Prowlarr, your LiDAR, your Radar, Redar, Flare Solver, well, Flare Solver is pretty much self-explanatory, and it does it itself. Jelly, Seer, all of them, all of the ports in here you can go through. You don't need to do, obviously, any of that for HTTP proxy, Shadow Socks, because that's all Gluetun. But your Jellyfin, your everything else in there, Deluge, all of it, you're going to want to make sure those are customized. And just as a top tip for Deluge, when you go into Deluge, this is the UI port 8112. And if I quickly just show you what I mean, 8112, The first thing it'll ask you is do you want to change the password? And the default password for Deluge is Deluge, Deluge. It'll ask, do you want to change it as recommended? I suggest that you would. I'm not going to do it right now. And then we can just click on connect, and that gets us to our instance. One of the most important things to do in here is go straight to the preferences. I know you can't see that because you've got this Nord button behind it. Preferences. Go down to, is it network? Yeah. Uncheck the box that says use random ports, because you're going to want to always maintain that 6881 because that's what's in your compose file. So always use that. And again, outgoing ports, we're going to not use random ports either. You'll see that it's got an IP address down here, which is not my system IP address. This is the IP address of Gluetun. And that's the current Nord IP address that it's picked up. The outgoing ports should be matched up with your Deluge here. So if I just copy that in there, that in there, that's what you kind of want to set your Deluge up to. So it mirrors that of going on in the compose file. So 6881 coming in, 58846 going out. That's really all you got to worry about with Deluge. Everything else pretty much a bit more easier to customize. Again, this is not a customization video. I'm not going to go into configuration with you guys on here because I have a lot of videos covering that, and I am going to leave them all in the link in the description below. So I hope this video has been of help to yourself. Again, I'm going to leave everything in the description below for you, so it's a really easy copy and paste scenario. And don't forget to watch my CASA. Don't forget to watch the Arrs apps configuration setup videos. I've got one for CASA OS. I've got one for just Linux and Windows. I've got a selection of them for you to watch. They've been really well received on YouTube. So again, didn't want to add that in here because this video is already long enough as it is. But thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll catch you in the next one.